All right, welcome back. It looks like we are here with Conversations from the Underground. This is episode 23. Um, we took a bit of another hiatus, but we're back at it to get back in the swing of things. What's going on, bro?
Man, yeah, long week again. I know, sometimes we have to skip a couple weeks, but that doesn't mean a lot of things ain't happening. Lately, I've just been preparing for this panel discussion for
Hmm.
Thursday. Um, I got to meet with Oksana, who is the Spanish teacher who I'm doing this with, um, tomorrow to talk a little bit about it. Got everything set up, got the links available, the QR codes and all that stuff. Basically, what we're going to do is talk about 15, 20 minutes about some general history of Russia and the opposition. Well, I should say the opposition of the likes of someone like Navalny, who was arrested in Russia. Talk a little bit about that modern day Russia, post Soviet Russia, and then maybe only 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll show about the first 30 minutes of the film. Then we'll stop it, give students access to be able to watch the rest of the film, and then spend about 30 minutes having a discussion about everything.
Do you feel that the first 30 minutes is a good starting point to introduce the students to? Like, is the information that's available within the first 30 minutes would be enough to kind of get them something to chew on, and then you guys build on that? Is that the idea?
Well, it's kind of hard. We didn't have as much time as we wanted to go through the whole thing, so I just sort of was like, maybe I asked what she thought about it. She thought it was a good idea to just kind of start because it's such a one piece documentary. It's not one of these things that's filled with exciting excerpts and sections like a Ken Burns documentary where you can just take a clip of this part to show it.
Mhm.
So it was like if we start out with a general introduction, talk about the context of the film, explain who Navalny is, explain what his ideas and philosophies are, and explain Putin's philosophy and interpretations and everything, then I think we can set the context right to where they have a good enough information to hit the ground running with the documentary, which will go from the opening discussion with him, which I hope will take us at least to where they start highlighting these Russian assassins,
Mm.
and pinpointing who they are. Like they located, in fact, some of the people who were on the plane with him when they
Mm.
poisoned, right? And so he starts calling all these people, pretending like he's another FSB agent or another Russian agent, talking, asking about why the thing went wrong. All of them hang up like they're supposed to because they know better. But one of them got caught up and
Oh,
messed up, responded to him, and he kept asking and got all these questions, and it was really really damaging. The next day, the opposition publishes that conversation, and that cat disappeared, and no one's ever seen him since then. You can kind of guess what happened to him, right?
oh, okay. That's crazy.
Yeah, because once that information became public, uh, the Russian government got rid of that dude. Is essentially what the idea is, right? Because he was doing what he wasn't supposed to be doing.
Will that part be aware to the students when you show it in
If
that
we make
first
it
sitting?
there, I think that whole part starts around the 30-minute mark. So it may stop, and I may start right there briefly before we open up for conversations. Be like, here's the access for you to go see the rest of the film. But essentially, what you see happening right here is Navalny's team pinpointing who was on the same plane as he was once they poisoned him, and these people worked for the Russian government,
Mm.
and they called each one of these numbers, acting like they were Russian agents. Hello, what's going on? Hello, what happened? Hello, tell me what happened with the person. Why it didn't work out? Did you do everything right? Everybody's sort of asking like who this is, whatever, and they catch wind that it ain't a legitimate Russian intelligence officer calling them because you ain't supposed to be talking on the phone like that. Most of these people have been trained like that, and they just hang up. But one guy
Mm.
ends up falling for it and starts talking to Navalny and thinking that Navalny is one of his superiors who instructed him to take out the hit, which they did while he was on an airplane. Right. They poisoned him with this stuff called Novichok, which is like a nerve gas that Russians are sort of, the Russian government is kind of infamously known for using in works of assassins to get rid of people the world.
Man, why didn't it work on him?
It's a very good question. So they show in the documentary him being poisoned. There's video camera of him in the thing screaming. They got into the Russian hospital. We'll see this part in the documentary. The Russian doctors don't let anybody in. They start telling, Russian media says he was at these orgies. He's a drug addict. He's going crazy. They're saying that there's nothing wrong with him. Maybe he has some kind of, I forget what they say, epilepsy, or they're clearly making up all this stuff, right? And his wife, they show him going in there. Germany got a plane and got him in there. It was very difficult. No one was letting him out. But once the international this kind of like emergency medical institution takes control, they hear about it. They fly the plane over there. The doctors can't very well keep his body anymore without it looking too bad, so they let him go. And when he got back to do the tests in Germany, they found Novichok in your body. Now, what happens with this poison is that once you die, all traces of it go away from your body, so no one can tell that you were poisoned with this agent. It just looks like you died of natural causes, because it just basically systematically shuts down all of your organs through your nervous system.
And then no trace.
Once you die, the traces go away, and so testing won't work. But they're asking him, why didn't this work? And the guy was like, we don't know. We put it on his underwear. We put it here. We did like we were supposed to. And then once the guy finds out, after the conversation goes way too long, that he's like, oh crap, he hangs up, and no one's ever heard from the guy again since then. It's a pretty interesting scenario, and then the rest of the film kind of goes through him recovering from the poisoning and then deciding to go right back to Russia, where he gets arrested once he comes off the plane. And hasn't got out of prison since.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. It's a pretty interesting story.
So he's still there?
Oh yeah. Now they've arrested him. Now they charged him. I think they got him in 19 years. They charged him for a crime that they had already dismissed over a decade ago. So Russia can arrest you for extremism, and if you have any money or whatever, they'll oftentimes accuse you of some sort of corruption, embezzlement. They've done this multiple times to people that are usually like millionaires. People make a lot of money, but when you try to get involved in politics is when it gets you into a little bit of trouble. You start to disappear when it comes to Russia.
Messing with Putin and the oligarchs of sorts.
Yeah, for sure. Russia's an interesting area, man. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done. This country for a while started to invest in Russian studies, but it's declined so much, unfortunately, and it's caused a lot of issues of understanding and putting us in a very dangerous situation that I think we're in now.
Is that notion of our lack of understanding of another community, their history, results in us making decisions that maybe are not in tune with maybe the people or the population? Is that what you mean? Like,
yeah, certainly.
I think the argument made against our involvement, or I should say our occupation of like Iraq and Afghanistan, was that we really didn't understand the people enough to know maybe the dynamics that were necessary to be successful there. And that ultimately led to us failing in Iraq and Afghanistan. Are you saying that that maybe our lack of, I guess, study in Russian history might result in a similar situation with Putin?
Yeah, even more of a problem, I think, because the Afghanistan and Iraq situation, most of the repercussions were about other things, imperial tendencies, imperial drives, geopolitical influence and control, some sort of imperialism with those countries. With Russia, this is more of a fight of a strategic, um, superpowers try, even though Russia's not a superpower, unfortunately for itself. It likes to think that it is, but it's got a lot of problems. It's that kind of idea. It's this difficulty with trying to position yourself in certain ways that are going to antagonize Russia or maybe not understand Russia. But that's not all the problems. I mean, because you know there's also the issue with Russia itself, right? I mean, they got their problems too. It's not as though our misunderstanding of them is the main problem with all this issue. It exacerbates the issue, certainly, but Putin is becoming increasingly more erratic, and maybe that has something to do with the West, but it also has to do with Ukraine and power. Ukraine has a lot to do with the West, but I think oftentimes he uses that excuse for power, and desperate to become a world power. But I mean, that's one of the reasons why Navalny's work is futile, or it doesn't work, because the Russian population is not increasing. The people who agree with Navalny are leaving the country for the West. So Navalny's philosophy is not a threat to Russia right now. That's why you don't even hear Putin don't even recognize it, don't even mention his name. Like you'll notice when you watch the early parts of the documentary, they'll show these things like according to the citizen who you describe, or according to this
right,
this so-called opposition leader, because he's like, give me a break. This has no chance of being successful in Russia, because Russians are still a very they believe in the czar, the strong leader, or
you didn't see that as like a passive way to dismiss his position or his stance in general.
Oh yeah, I mean it reflects the lack of support, because look how he responded to the Prigozhin Wagner group. That scared the hell out of him. Why? Because if there's going to be a revolution in Russia, if there's going to be a toppling of the government in Russia, it's going to come from a Soviet-style leader like Prigozhin was, right? Navalny deserves tremendous amount of credit for his belief in democracy. It's amazing. It's selfless. It's unbelievable that he sacrifices himself like this, but it ultimately is going to be a sacrifice that doesn't have any gain. I mean, Russia has proven itself. It's still not even close, man. I think to real democracy.
Yeah, that's wild. That when an individual makes a sacrifice for the greater good, and it like falls on deaf ears, it like reminds me of potentially of how maybe Snowden was treated.
Oh yeah.
Informing the American public of the government's involvement with espionage on its own citizens illegally, or unbeknownst to the people, the public at large, and then to find himself freezing somewhere in Russia. Is it in Russia? Is that where he is now?
Yeah,
he's still there.
He was in the airport. I don't really know what all happened to that afterwards. I haven't looked back in on what's the whole Snowden situation in the past couple of years. Actually, I should probably look that up. But yeah, it's similar. I mean, now don't get me wrong. I mean, he's got millions of people who support him, which is a lot. But talking about a country with hundreds of millions of people.
Navalny or Snowden?
Navalny. Navalny's got
Mm.
millions of people in Russia who will vote for him and shift things and be supported, but it's just not enough. It's not even close.
Mm.
And he's been arrested and sitting there in prison. He was on a hunger strike, and he's done all these other types of things, and there's just nothing to it. They just keep dragging him back out to court and hitting him one more time. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And to think nothing's happened to him while he's in prison either. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, he talks a little bit about this. Interesting. In that documentary, he talks about how, he thought the more popular I got, the more safe I was, because they can't get me when everybody likes me. But
In prison, people are like him because I was thinking they'd probably they'd isolate him.
Yeah.
Just so he isn't
they know
harmed.
they pay attention. They're there as much as they can. There's a strong group that maybe at least Navalny thinks that they would fear him becoming a martyr.
Right.
But
I was gathering that from the first part of the documentary that he almost feels to some degree that maybe he can't be touched because then it would be disastrous for Putin administration.
Right.
If anything were to happen to him.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of
a reach.
Yeah, I mean, there may be some points to it, but I think they're just treating him like this guy named Khodorkovsky. I remember in the early 2000s, he started getting in trouble, and they did the same thing. I mean, the guy ended up spending like almost 20 years in prison before they let him out and told him to leave, and now he's left. He ain't came back. You know what I mean? He's in Europe. They're going to do the same thing in Navalny, I think. They're probably going to there for 20 years, and then they'll be like, all right, we'll let you out. You better get out of here. And we'll see what he does. If he goes out like Khodorkovsky and becomes an expatriate and chickens out and stays out there, or if he says, all right, I'm coming back and y'all gonna arrest me again, just like he did, knowing that was happening, that may shift the support. It's hard to say, man. I mean, what can get the majority of people willing to sacrifice their life to go up against a government that has been very totalitarian for a long time? That's a hard thing to think about. Like, American culture is much different. Like, American culture, were all these elites who were pretty much surviving without the king already. They had this benign philosophy where these fools were leaving them alone. And so they were like, yeah, we can beat these fools, and they developed in a culture of this notion of rallying together for fighting for democracy and Republican Enlightenment principles. But you do that shit in Russia, man, millions of soldiers will come up and take care of you like they've been doing. And there's, for as many, there's more people who benefit from that strong rule, mafia style. You're going to get paid for your power and your brute force. There's a lot of people who still operate that way.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, America doesn't strike me as, or Americans don't, by and large, don't strike me as one to respond to the sacrifice of others at all. I mean, not that America was probably put in a position to do anything with Snowden, but if and when Snowden was ultimately exiled to some degree, forced to leave the country for his own safety, it's not like America was up in arms about it. We made a movie.
No, but what I mean by that is fighting for democracy, fighting against the government, like the independence movement, or to overthrow the government, to transform the government. Like, America.
Is that what this? So what Navalny's asking to do is to transform the government from the control of Putin.
Yeah, because Putin is a dictator. The country has been under totalitarian regime. He suspended the Constitution. He switched the Constitution. He allowed himself to be president more. He was president. He couldn't be president again, so he became prime minister and picked the president. And while he was
I remember that.
There, he changed the Constitution so he could come back and be president again, and then he can go all the way, I think, till 2032 now before he has to change the rules again.
Yeah.
20, I think it's 2032 or something. This is and Navalny's program is all about an anti-corruption campaign, having
Mm-hmm.
free elections, having a more Western style liberal form of government as opposed to a Eurasian, uh, Eastern European, Soviet style, or even Tsarist before then,
Right.
control, right?
Strongman control.
Exactly. Right. Russia is a big place. It needs the protection. It needs this. It needs that. The things that they've used to gain control have been very, very powerful cultural forces. And of course, Putin, his whole life, if you remember for the past 2 decades, it's always like, oh, here's Putin scoring 15, goals and playing in a hockey game, or going and catching the biggest fish, or walking around with his shirt off, riding a
Mm-hmm.
horse, doing all this stuff to try to look strong and powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's getting weaker, and he's getting a little worried. And Prigozhin and some of these other people who look strong almost uh, tried to make a move, and he responded to that real quickly. It wasn't no so-called citizen this, or you know what I mean. It was like, because he knows that that's how power transfers in Russia.
That's how it transferred for him. I mean, I think a lot of times, well, I mean, it's not that I think it, we know it. Individuals that seized power forcefully are usually the ones that are the most concerned or cautious about the re-seizure of their power by way of force. If they used force to obtain power, somebody like Castro,
Mm.
who's well aware of how coups take place, where they take place, having men on the inside, if you will. And so that turned him into a paranoid individual.
Yeah.
I think the argument has been made of Putin the same, that he's become increasingly isolated and paranoid in his later years because he's becoming well aware of his fragility
Yeah,
in the physical sense and maybe even political sense.
yeah, that's a great point. The only thing that's unique about this situation is that Putin didn't come to power by seizing it,
Mm,
that way. He kind of came to power because of luck. I mean, he was very close
really?
to yeah, he was very close to Boris Yeltsin when
Right.
Boris Yeltsin was the first and only other real president of the former Soviet Union,
Hmm.
and he was just a bad. Everything was bad. The economy was bad. Everything was horrible under him, and he was kind of with this guy. Was able to kind of mess behind the scenes, get a lot of political support with the right people, introduced him to the right people, which led his political career to just rise up, man. And then once he got elected, he used oil and some other things to really kind of transform Russian economy, which wasn't really hard because of how bad it was before him, right? So it looked really
Hmm.
good. And then he got bogged down in a lot of these wars with the Chechens, and that he successfully subdued. Now you see him walking around with his little uh, bulldog Chechen leader who's supporting him, which is a far cry from 20 years ago when Chechens were blowing up schools to try to get
Yeah.
the Russians out of there.
Really? They've
Yeah.
cozied up with each other? The Chechen
Well,
ruler guy?
is a puppet of Putin now. You'll see him.
Mm.
I forget his name. Kadyrov, maybe. He has a pretty big beard.
The
You
guy with
always
the
see
beard, right? Yeah, yeah.
kind of a
He's always
hesitant.
wearing like a tech vest
Yeah,
of some
with a
sort.
little military uniform and his 9 millimeter.
Right.
Um, you know, uh,
Really?
yeah. So it's an interesting situation, man. It really is. He's used, fear of the West, which is legitimate fear that a lot of Russians have of NATO, um, just to really grab more power, I think. And I don't know. We still got to see how it's gonna how it's gonna play out. It's tough though.
So
Of course,
much of so uh Oksana, is that who you're going to be presenting with?
yeah. Oksana she's a Spanish teacher, but
Okay.
she's like half Ukrainian, half Russian.
Got you.
So she's really been there. There was a couple of events that she did when the Russian-Ukraine war just broke out. Kind of early on that semester, she did a couple little events that I went to. Because I've always been interested in this Russian stuff. And so when this Navalny documentary came out, I just reached out to her to see if she wanted to do something with it. And so yeah, that's what we came up with. And then next year or next semester, we're doing something similar to this, but there's an expert, a Navalny expert or something, who's going to come and talk a lot more about kind of like a part two to what we're doing, right? What we're
Got
doing
you. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So continuation lecture.
Yeah, for sure. But
Gotcha.
instead of showing a film, it'll be him there giving a discussion, either present or a virtual or of some sort. I don't know how.
Okay. Got you. Shoot, getting him here would be great.
Yeah.
But you got to make do with what you can.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, man. So I've been going through a lot of my my journal. Like when I was in Russia for about 6 weeks or so before I finished my master's degree, kind of the master's degree. And I took like a couple hundred pages of notes there every night. Before I went to bed, I wrote a summary about what I did that day. And then between the days, in the middle of the day, sometimes I would write stuff too. And I've been trying to go back through it to kind of see any kind of impressions about maybe what the culture was like then. Some of these young people, I wonder where they're at now. It's just been seems like such a big shift that Russia has endured since that time period. It's like 2005 maybe, which
Yeah, that means that even when you went, they probably were not exposed to maybe social media and the utilization of social media as a platform to spread information, to become more aware, to influence individuals as much as it is in our society. I can only imagine what it was like there. As you're going through your notes and whatnot, you're talking about a pre-iPhone Russia.
Yeah. I'm looking at all these long ass phone numbers, these weird numbers of that you're supposed to have to write, and the addresses. The only way you
remember
can
them,
send something through the address, and got some emails. But when I send those emails, it bounce back and say it ain't working no more.
Oh, of course. Yeah, because at the same time, the handles might be different. And or I shouldn't say the handles, whatever, the last part, because back in 2005, you probably had a Hotmail account. You remember those, or an AOL account?
Yeah.
You might have had, God knows what type of account. So I can only imagine what they had in Russia, and it's fairly primitive.
Yeah, they all ended in .ru.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like RU, like a Russian something, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, because in Europe they might have something like the EU attached to their email.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe the United States might be one of the few places where you don't have that, where we don't put US on the end of our stuff as other nations.
I'd be interested to look into that more.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you're talking about. I feel like I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it when I've encountered European emails or European just websites in general. They'll put like an EU next to it. Now, at the same time, I could be wrong, but I want to believe that America tends to have one of the least regulated internet providers or access to the internet at large. We tend to not monitor it as much, or maybe police it as much as other countries tend to do.
Yeah.
For better or worse, I don't know. Shoot.
Yeah, man, I don't know. This sort of feels like we're inching closer and closer to a real another global catastrophic
conflict because of the other issues as well, in the Middle East. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, just everything.
Like that coupling with so
Right.
I mean, we could take it all the way back. Well, Russia's always been an issue, but we could probably take it back to maybe on top of the geopolitical issues between Russia, China, and the United States, when the economic threat with BRICS kind of contributed to that, or I should say added on to the level of warnings or threats that these countries were posing. And then to have these territorial conflicts added to the mix. So there was politics already. Then it became clear economics. And then now we have these territorial
violence. It's the violence that stems from them that comes back. It's like a stage, it feels like. You know what I mean?
The violence is there for sure. The question is, where do nations side on the issue? And that's the difficult part.
Which I think is the next level, right? So you got the violence breaking out. Now you got the pieces kind of aligning on each side of that violence.
They have to, right?
And then they start investing in it, and then sometimes
absolutely
so much, and then they lose it, and they're like, "Oh, we got to do more now." Or we've invested so much, we can't stop now, so we keep going in. We keep inching another step forward before it all just kind of blows over.
So I think that we're currently probably in like the alliance stage, like figuring out who our allies are, who they're not, as we inch closer and closer to determining where we stand on the issue. Because I'm not, granted, the Biden administration has probably made gestures about, well, we stand firmly with Israel, because that's always been America's stance from the outset. And as long as we don't get drawn into and when I say we, as long as the United States doesn't get drawn into equating Hamas with the Palestinian people, they'll be in an even better position, because they can still toe the "I'm with Israel" line, as well as maintain their "we are against terrorist organizations" line, and somehow not look. Well, no, I think they're gonna look alienating either way. But it's definitely, America's probably still gonna toe what it toes and follow the path that they've laid out for themselves for quite some time, and that's what I'm gonna stand against terrorism, and then therefore stand with Israel.
Well, so Israel is a Western creation, right?
For sure.
A NATO creation, you could argue, even though NATO wasn't officially really enacted yet. And people have been talking about it a lot earlier. We're talking about the ones who won World War One, the ones who won World War Two, and of course, after World War Two, Soviet Union breaks from that alliance and goes back to the side of the bad guys. And so it's like the bad guys and the good guys, or if we want to use the same language they use, good and evil. Like, and so they're going to have to, they can't not support Israel. Biden can't not be a Zionist. You can't, the United States is Zionist. They
right.
created the nation when there were 10% of the population of Palestine was Jewish people, and they created them and moved a lot of Jews there, and now it's 80 something percent Jewish population.
Yeah, slowly but surely they've been displacing, occupying, and building settlements in various parts of
that happened. Palestinians went to war with Israel, and then it stopped, and it's happened every decade since.
Right.
So it's just so comical to me how people see this thing like, oh my gosh, what happened? Like, what do you mean what happened? We've been looking at it for the past 70
Dude,
years.
I'm giving the lecture. I'm wrapping up my World War I lecture. And at the very end of the lecture, one of the slide is referred to as the ghost of Versailles. Ghost implying that these things come back to haunt. And I have German resentment fomenting in the rise of Hitler. I have Tatan turning into Ho Chi Minh. I have Eastern European countries involved in civil strife for the next, 3 or 4 decades. And then I have a slide. I have a bullet point. This is right after World War I. Never-ending conflict between Arabs and Israelis. And I created that PowerPoint lecture probably like 13, 16 years ago.
Yeah, because it ain't been no different.
Nothing changed. Nothing changed. Yeah, we've been known about this, but
Right.
Anybody that knows history will know that this isn't just a new thing. If anything, it's a flare-up of a problem that we've never really addressed.
Right.
And I'll say this, and I talked about it in one class, and my Nigerian students were quick to point out, the British mess up everything.
Well, there's some serious truth to that.
Of course there is. If you talk about all the Arab states that were created shortly after World War I, and then of course you're going to have, if you have all these Arab states created, of course, if you're Jewish, you're going to be looking at yourself like, yo, where's our state? What are you doing? You got all these Arab states. Where's our state? And they have nothing. And then that coupled with everyone's understanding of the Holocaust taking place, and us just being, and when I say us, the United States kind of being silent on the issue, like, oh, we heard about it. We're not really sure though, but we're hearing about it. And then the exposure of the Holocaust to the American people, to the American government, to governments worldwide, is definitely going to contribute to, I think they might need their own state. Now, where? How about here? Here we go.
Nobody wanted to give up any of their territory, did they?
Of course not. No.
That's what's interesting. It's a very unfortunate situation. On the one hand, Jewish people have been facing significant amounts of anti-Semitism for a long time, and because they're so dispersed throughout the world, yet still have a cultural connection with each other, it makes them a prime target often for scapegoating, right?
For sure.
And that's the biggest problem here.
It's a difficult one. It's not. I mean, and it goes along the line that can you historically be a victim and subject others to oppression at the same time? Is that possible? And yeah, it is possible. It's difficult for us to point out at times, but no, it's absolutely possible. It's like, I can be like, let's say I got a problem with a guy who happens to be Asian, or let's say I have a problem with for the sake of the conversation, a black guy. So an African American, I have a problem with this black guy. Is it possible that I just have a problem with you for the sake of you being you and not you being black? I think that those issues can be real and they exist. Now, the optics will give off the impression, no, Eric, you probably just have a problem with this guy because he's a black guy. And I go, and then so what that lends itself to is that most people will see race first, that these are the real issues. That if I have a problem with this Jewish person, does it automatically make me an anti-Semite? Or is it just that, no, I have a problem with you because you're being an ass right now. Like, and that's really what the problem is. Me being critical of Israel's response, or Israel at large, and what I mean by that is the Israeli government, doesn't automatically make one a Semite, but the optics tend to lend itself in that direction. This is the difficulty of most people having any type of say or making a statement on the issue at all, It's because people don't know how to have these conversations. How do I have a conversation where I let you know exactly where I stand towards an individual who has a history of being discriminated against while still being critical of that community? And again, in the United States, the equivalency would be the African American community. How am I able to be critical of the African American community who has a history of being discriminated against in this country, while at the same time being critical towards them and their treatment towards, I don't know, let's just say the homosexual community, or let's say the African American communities and their discrimination towards, or their potential discrimination towards the homosexual community or the Korean community in LA. Um, is that possible? And I think it's definitely possible. It's just difficult because we tend to not want to do that, because don't forget America's history towards Black people. Then that would be messed up. And so if we look at it in the worldview, well, don't say this about Jewish people because of the way they've been treated historically in a world that, like, yeah, they have been treated like shit historically, but they could be treating people like shit like right now. That doesn't excuse them from the same critique. It's just ironic, if anything, and it's our inability or difficult, our one's finding it difficult to point out that irony that I think needs to be talked about more than anything. Is why can't we have this conversation? Why is it so difficult for people to, at the very least, take a stance on an issue? And you know what? And if I have to be shown something different, okay, well then I'll draw it back. But at the very least, I should still be able to have that point, make that point, without being labeled an anti-Semite, or being considered pro-terrorist.
Yeah.
And I know we have a bunch of students that have asked me point blank, "Yo, when are you going to talk about this?" And I'm like, and I ain't even front. The moment it presented itself, it was talked about in my class, and it's talked about not with kid gloves, but with perspective. We have to also understand that when we're talking on these issues, much of the information we're hearing is in the moment. So it's not even really history. If anything, it's news. And news has a tendency to not only be incorrect, could be misleading, um, could be presented with ill intent. It's only after time where we can have a consensus on as to, okay, what is the history, which is generally what we delve in. That takes time. It takes consensus. It takes, I think the study explains, at least 25 years. Otherwise, it's reporting the news. And again, if we happen to report on that too quickly, we might find ourselves reporting incorrectly. And nobody who wants to be incorrect on the issue. We want to be on the right side of history. Like, well, no, in the moment, this is what I felt. In the moment, this is what happened. And in the moment, this is what I'm telling you. And you don't have to hang me out to dry because this is what I felt in the moment. I'm no problems rectifying my position or course based on new information. But it's definitely a conversation that's difficult to have. That's for sure. Many of our students have asked where we stood on the issue. That's for sure too. They were waiting for this moment. They're like, "Hey, when is Conversations from the Underground going to have the talk about it?" And I'm like, "Man, I don't know." And not to say, and I'll stop after this. Not to say we didn't have our talk last week because we weren't sure as to how we were going to approach it. Because trust me, ain't nothing stopping us from talking about it. We're going to talk about it. It's
if
just
you looked at those last couple episodes, we may have mentioned it briefly on each one.
Coming into it.
At some point or another, it came up as a point to be discussed, which is how history should be focused on. Like you bring it up when you find the connections, when you see the patterns, when you see and can explain a little bit of why, right? And I think this is a great example to me of how history, and I don't want to give away this quote already because I already, I mean, this just got me ready for the last end of the quote, right? But it sort of traps us. History does. We are confined oftentimes to the past in the way we respond in the present. Our present responses are not disconnected from our past. You mentioned something about how he saw race, his racism. We look at race first. Absolutely, in the United States of America, right? Because the United States of America's history has so much connection to this issue of race, right? What happens is when you live in a culture that has a significant conflict or factor connected to its past, it informs the way we see the present. And it oftentimes acts like our cultural lens. It can blind us from other explanations. It can prevent us from seeing alternative options or alternative ways of being or ways of looking at reasons for what things are and why they are, because we're so used to falling back on our experiences that we oftentimes can't think of new experiences. This is one of the reasons why people like Andre 3000 were always looked at as weird, or in a rap game, if somebody would dress funny or they wouldn't be gangster or wouldn't be this, they were like, oh, what's it? This is strange. This is weird. Another great example of that, because it's like you grow up thinking this is the image that you're supposed to be, and then when you see a form of blackness that doesn't fit what you thought black meant, or what you thought black hip hop meant, you see it in an odd way. It happens all the time where we fall back on our history in order to stereotype the past. It's essentially what a stereotype is, right? If we blame the guy this way, right? Sometimes stereotypes are useful, right? And that's one of the reasons why they're there, is because
quick snapshot of
if you get a quick
what we
snap,
remember.
oh, there's something here that's connected. I can use this. Well, great. But the problem is, it doesn't always work out that way. It's when you judge all historical possibilities through this stereotypical lens, you don't.
That's.
Go ahead.
Not to interrupt you, man. That's such a fun. Not funny. It's not funny. It's such an interesting perspective. Are you saying that, you know how we tend to have stereotypes of people?
Mm-hmm.
You're saying that, and it makes so much sense now that you've said it. Like, we have
here's an example.
Stereotype views of history.
Yeah, I got a stereotype that I know when I take this medication, it's going to make me feel a certain way. So I can bet on it's going to happening all the time, but there may be something in my system that I'm not aware of that when I take this medicine, it's going to cause a problem. You stereotypes work based off a repetitive thing. I felt this, it did this. I know it's going to work. I'm going to rely on it. I stereotype in anything. I know this is going to happen to me if I do this, or I see this happening. I can draw judgments from it, right?
Let's see, that sounds more like a prejudgment. Now, I don't want to equate the two, where a stereotype and a prejudgment may be different. Whereas a prejudgment tends to lend itself to the negative connotation of prejudice, but we make prejudgments all the time that could be based on non-negative encounters that could still be positive. And what I mean by that is, I can make a prejudgment based on my experience that may not lend itself to a stereotype. I wonder, because we're not fact checking anything here, because I'm not Googling anything. He ain't Googling anything. We're just, off the cuff. I wonder what the real not discrepancies, but differences would be between a prejudgment and a stereotype. And then if prejudgments are okay, because there's a tendency for us to hear the word prejudice and immediately assume that that's a negative thing. And it's not always a negative
Yeah,
thing.
great question. And I was going to say that. I was going to say my response would be, what is a stereotype other than multiple accumulations of prejudgments that have come together to make me think a certain way pretty
Right.
quickly when I get onto
Right.
something, right?
And it's not always negative. Like, for
Certainly.
example, I don't have to, like when I'm on the highway, I can make a prejudgment to not get in the left lane unless I want to go fast. You know, I've had multiple experiences knowing that I can make a judgment. I don't want to drive at this speed, so I'm not getting in my left lane. Now that's a prejudgment I've made before even getting on the highway. It doesn't always have to be negative. Now, generally, when we apply it to groups of people, there comes a bunch of negative connotations for sure. Now, what I was really interested in was the notion that are you saying that that sometimes we have stereotypes of history, or that we have a stereotypical lens of history sometimes?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. The way we answer questions about the past can oftentimes be connected to other answers we've developed in different historical topics that we apply. I think
That's
that's purpose. I think that's arguable. But you know what? I would say,
that's cool as heck. I want to read something on that. I swear on everything. I've never even thought about that concept, but like, is it possible to stereotypically understand history? That's such a funny notion to
about it.
me.
Like,
I've never heard it that
look
way.
at social history, like people who study, or what are people who Marxist theory? They stereotype history. They try to only to think history is all about class struggle. So they read class struggle into everything that they see. Or a capitalist free market person who loves the free market capitalism will tell the history of the disintegration of the European empires much differently than
Okay.
the stereotype of the Marxist would, right? It's what we do all the time, and like back to the idea that some can be normal. Like I can pretty much make a pretty good stereotype to say that if you make it to the NFL, you're a pretty fast person. You can run fast. If you play running back, you're probably going to be a fast runner. But you can
Right.
find running backs who aren't that fast, who are really good, right?
Okay.
Um,
Fair enough.
you know what I mean? But that don't make it not right. That even though that's a stereotype right there, some stereotypes can be more accurate than others.
You know what? And here's what I heard you just say regarding you could be a Marxist and you would stereotype
Keep talking
history and that.
to you, and I got to run for not even a few seconds, but I'm listening.
Yeah, yeah. No doubt, no doubt. So, um, that a Marxist will stereotype history, and what they'll do is they'll find information, or they'll make every interaction some type of class struggle. And if Marxists can do that, meaning that it seems like they find themselves searching for material that only relates to um, their paradigm of class struggle, and they in essence create an echo chamber of information, or isolate them in an environment where that's the only information that they get. I wonder if the algorithms that people have today
Yes.
are maybe like the 21st or technological equivalents to that same idea, that algorithms are finding people in stereotypical realms of information.
Right.
Then so they're finding, oh well, I'm a liberal, so I'm gonna only encounter information that supports my liberal position, and makes fools of the opposition.
And you're
And
more
then
likely
that's
to this, so I'm going to give you this ad. You're more likely to do, right? I mean, it's everything. In fact, I would say that algorithms have perfected the
the
stereotype.
stereotypical history.
Certainly.
Or because history is nothing more than information of the past. The algorithms are presenting stereotypical uh, troves of information of the present, like of news,
Right.
or of things that we want to consume.
Yeah. But what's
Wow,
interesting is
that's
that
so
the longer
crazy.
what's interesting is that the longer you consume within that algorithm, the more accurate the stereotypes, because they can rely on that history. Their algorithms will include that history. If you've been buying the same thing from the same website for 10 years, their algorithm is going to operate on all that data that they have of your patterns. And they're going to oftentimes help further reinforce our own stereotypes and prevent us from being more creative and opening our eyes to something else, right? I mean, how many stories do we have of white people who grew up in the 50s and 60s thinking all these things about black people that were bad and all this other stuff, and then their mind gets opened up one day, they have a conversation with a black person and they're like, oh my god, this wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, and they become friends and they change their entire course of their life. Our life is becoming so much more fed to us that the possibility to have those different interactions outside of your general mindset are becoming
Tend to
less and
be,
less possible.
yes, more limited, less and less likely, because we want to stay more so in this comfortable, stereotypical.
Bubble. Bubble, you can call it that. But if you read that
That's
book,
crazy. I
read
never
that book,
thought about it like that. Which one?
Ready Player One and Ready Player Two. It's like a novel. They
Oh, I remember
made a
us
garbage
talking
movie
about the
out of
movie
it.
once.
Yeah, we've talked about it. They made a garbage movie out of it, but the philosophy behind those books are crazy dope. And it gets to the point where it's like, dude is in some kind of suit in a bubble, really, where the world is around him. You don't have to use your body anymore. And this brings us back to that concept of AI and over centuries, how it becomes stronger and can, I think, ultimately surpass humanity if we're not careful, because of that part. But it's hard, man. Stereotypes are such a prevalent part of human experience that you can't tell history without some element of them embedded within the story. And humans, I would even argue, can't exist without stereotypes anymore. It's just a matter of
Because
uh,
it's the easiest way to encode or embed previous experience.
right.
I
It's
remember a
just
comedian one time arguing that most of your jokes rely on the presumption that a stereotype exists. Because in order for us to, or in order for you to understand the joke that I'm about to tell, it relies upon an existing stereotype, an understanding that you have and I have in order to reach the joke's conclusion.
mhm,
That stereotypes must exist, whether they're good or bad,
right,
in order for us to be on this, have a similar understanding.
right. The key is to just not essentialize the human experience through stereotypical lenses, right? That's the problem. You don't want to reduce human beings, or essentialize human beings who have been categorized for one purpose or another in a particular
Mm-hmm.
society, as a monolithic, standard cookie cutter persona that you have somehow um, been indoctrinated with or inculcated with or developed, um, within the culture that you live in. It's
That's
hard.
interesting, man. That's a very, I've never heard of it like that. That's a very interesting notion that we have somehow we might be stereotypically viewing history. And then if we're doing that, or if we're not doing that, are there other entities that are doing that? And again, the individuals who create algorithms, the corporations that create algorithms, the companies that create algorithms, to what end? If they're serving corporate interests, I can only imagine that they might serve like a government's interest.
Yeah, and actually, you can even think about it. For instance, the Chat GDP is essentially taking algorithms when you ask it to write an essay over something for you. It's essentially doing the same thing, right? Taking this stereotypical algorithmic understanding of what's been given to it to produce something, which I think um, kind of adds together all of this stuff that we've referenced so far in our time, which I believe is coming to an end. Um,
Hmm.
I think this great James Baldwin quote, "People are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them," most poignantly reflects, if you because you can look at the Russian example, you can look at the Israeli-Palestinian example, you can look at the race that example in the United States that you described, and with these algorithms, is sort of like the trappings of history, how we trap ourselves in past experiences to move through the world or navigate through the world that we live in. And when you're trapped into something like this, it's very difficult to get out.
Yeah, stereotypes are hard to get out of. That's for sure. Whether they're imposed or self-imposed.
Certainly. And the
Yeah.
more emotional one gets, the more they tend to rely on these stereotypes as well. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I can't tell you how many
It's
times
an easy way to understand things.
I can't tell you how many times you've heard in the culture so far in our life where some liberal is supportive of whatever people in the hood, and I'm gonna be supportive, and then they get robbed, and it's like right straight to these. See, I told you, I knew it, right? I mean, how clear is that of an example? I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's crazy, man. That's a good. I like that, and I want to keep. I had a quote too, but I'm gonna save it.
Oh, okay.
No, 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 no. I'm just gonna leave it at that.
Right on.
We'll leave the quote at that. I got a quote. We'll talk about it a bit later.
Sounds
We'll see
good.
what's up, but we'll end it at that.
Cool. All right, man.
So,
Till next time.
sir. Till next time for sure. Next Monday.
Peace.
All right.